So ChatGPT have released some huge updates this week that makes it genuinely useful for the construction industry. The most important one of which I'll touch on later is called ChatGPT Work, which, if you're familiar with Claude, is Cowork's sort of equivalent or competitor, so that we can now connect all of a construction project, including the drawings and specifications and everything that goes with it, to ChatGPT all in one go. And the reason that is important is because in construction, we deal with a large amount of documents, and now we have the ability to connect ChatGPT to them to actually create meaningful work. And the second of which is ChatGPT has released the latest round of models with their latest models, Sol, Terra, and Luna. So today is a full overview on what ChatGPT is, how it works, and how it is actually now useful for construction. I'm going to cover the basics right the way through for how to use ChatGPT Work. So kicking it off, because I know there are a lot of people that end up being stuck on using the browser rather than the desktop app. So ChatGPT now does have its desktop app, which is separate to Codex, what it used to be. So we can either run in here in the browser or in the desktop over here. And there's some big differences between the two, so I'll jump into those now. So a quick tour of the browser version. One of the main differences is when we're using Work. So Work in this instance connects to your browser projects, your cloud projects. These are not files on your computers or folder on your computer. This is projects you've set up previously and attached the context to that one and have potentially been working with it for a while. So you can choose a project for it to work in, or you can simply go ahead and use it more in the chat way, but it doesn't connect to the folder on your computer itself. So that's the main one, and chat window still sits within here. So the main difference for browser in this instance is that chat is for those quick one-off tasks that you don't really need to add much context to or really need to go that deeply on. Work is, as it suggests, where you go to actually complete work. So for something like reviewing a contract or creating a first drafts of your clarifications register, those kind of things you do be doing Work, but the better version is on the desktop app, which I'll go through shortly. And now if we jump into the desktop app here, we can see that this is Work. And the way the three options we have is the chat window becomes sort of less of a priority here. You can see to start a chat, you click this chat button, it comes up as a pop-up, and this is where we can do those quick tasks as like a side panel. And I've heard the rumors that this will be moving. I suspect to be up here or somewhere like that, so it'll be its own area. But for now, chat sits in the side here. Then we go to Work. So essentially, the two other options are Work or Codex. Work being the one that's best for us to do actual work in, and Codex, which you can also do work in, but is tailored more towards a developer and does require some more knowledge in terms of the coding space as well. So I'll touch on Work a lot more later, but that's the key thing with the desktop app. And all we need to know for now is when we're choosing a project, we're actually choosing a folder that's on our desktop and not what we had as our sort of our cloud projects as such that run in the browser. And you can see here on the side, my projects are now different projects that I'm working on that are actually my folder structures themselves. They're different to the ones that I have on the browser there. And on a similar sense, what's worth knowing now, and I'll touch on this more later, is skills currently don't transfer across. So if you upload a skill on the browser, they won't appear on your desktop app either. So just another one to catch out. There are some differences there. And with that, that's sort of the two areas you want to go to do your work. What I recommend is very simple. If you can, then use the desktop app. There's just a lot more functionality that's built into it. It's better for construction because we can connect our entire folders to it, and just in general gives us some more usability. Having said that, using the browser is actually where we want to go ahead and start looking at our settings. And this is important. So there are more setting options on the browser here. So now we can jump into the settings tab. You can see here where we can go through and see the different plan options and the personalizations, the profile, etc. I want to jump into the settings here and go through very typically the general. You can go ahead and have a look through those. The couple I want to touch on, the first one is if we come down here to personalization. This is where you can set how you interact with ChatGPT, and also you can come down here and set the custom instructions. So you can say probably something like your role, whether you're an estimator or project manager or something along those lines, and then your preferences over time. Now, I don't have much in the way of this, as the way I structure my folders inside of Work or Codex, so it has that built in with what's called an agents.md file, which I'll touch on more later. And then you can go ahead and add a bit more about you down the track as well. The one thing I want to touch on here is this memory is off by default, and I think this is useful. I like to have it on, so I am going to turn that on so that it does remember me over time. Now that's number one. The second place that I think is worth visiting here is our data controls. So we can see here that there is improve the model for everyone. This is on by default. So to turn that off, what I'm going to do is just come in here, click on this and toggle that off. This is on by default, and I suspect most people will not want that on. Hit done, and then you can browse through the remainder of these settings, but that is all I want to touch on for those for now. Usage is good to look at as well, as this is where you can see exactly how you're tracking. So if you're on day 2 of your week and you're have used 70% of your usage, then you know that you're going to hit some issues down the track. So good to keep an eye on that as well. Now, the next thing that I want to go onto is I suppose the other part of the updates that is really good news for construction. And that is that you can now easily have skills and plugins inside of ChatGPT, and you can use the format that Claude uses, which is the .skill. And for those that don't know, a skill is just a very defined workflow. So it's a set of instructions and reference files that tell the LLM or tell ChatGPT exactly what to do and then where to go to find the information. And often the information is contained within the skill. So these won't appear inside of chat, but they do appear in Work on the browser, and they do appear on Work on the desktop. So to call them, you've got to go and then we can go start typing the name of the skill. You can see already it gives you some options of others to add, but if we go down here, then we've got the conceptual estimate, which is the skill I currently have uploaded on my on the browser here. Click that, it'll highlight it, and I would obviously need to add some files to that so that it could go ahead and complete a conceptual estimate. So that's how to call on them. Where to find them is actually inside of plugins here. You'll see plugins. This is where we have connectors, and we can also have connectors plus workflows in a similar way to how Claude manages plugins. For example, like you can connect to Notion. I've already got Gmail, Google Docs, etc. connected. But if we come down here, we can see there's things like these sales that are out as well. And this is a plugin which comes with connectors, and also down the bottom, you'll see it comes with the set of skills that's been built, in this case by OpenAI. And these will have these would essentially do different activities in that download, plug and play type thing. You can have a look at what the skill is actually involved with the skill by just clicking on them and having a look around to exactly how they've been prompted. The main thing will be modifying them so that they work for you. So that's the plugins. Now, if we come back and up to the top here, where we can find the skills on the desktop app is in skills. And interestingly enough, we can go add, either create with chat. So it'll use OpenAI's skill creator skill to architect the workflow, or we can go through and upload from the computer, which is the easiest. If you already have skills, like for example, inside of Contractor OS, we have a library of over 95 different skills for construction, which you can download, upload, and run. this is an easy way to get them up and running. For some reason, this feature isn't available in the desktop app just yet. For now, that is only there. I will show you in just a second how to get skills inside of the desktop app as well. So there you can see the library of your skills that you'll build up over time, which is very important. And now I did mention that the desktop app is slightly different. And so if we jump into here, we can see in the same way that we call on a skill, we can still go at and then the skill name. So I have a lot more in here. Let's go the project indexer, which is one of the most popular skills. Again, hit that, highlights blue, and I don't actually have it connected to a project, so I'd connect it to one of my projects, and now we're working within that folder and I can run the project indexer skill. So that's that. Then I'll jump in here. Now if I want to find my library, what I actually do is I go to plugins, and this is the same space as before. We can see we have public plugins, and you also have personal on the desktop as well, where you can create your own, and a similar method up here. You can go create a plugin, add from marketplace, or record a skill. Now to get to skills, we go across, we go skill, and here you can see all of the skills that you have set up, and you can see this is my operating system, you could call it. So the place I go to most often to do my work, and it knows a lot about my goals, what I'm working on, and the history as well. And then you can see that's what's sort of loaded inside of my file there. I've got my personal skills, which are the ones that I've uploaded, and these are from Contractor OS. And lastly, I have the system skills, which are OpenAI skills that they have created and are already loaded in here as well. Now, to get a skill inside of my desktop, it's not quite as easy as the browser. So if I come up here, I'm sure this will change, but I can go create, which opens a new window, and this is where we're gonna end up anyway. But let's go back and go to skills. Then if I go to the down arrow, there's no upload button. It's just record a skill, which is essentially it will watch you do a task on your screen and then create a skill out of that. Or create a skill, which is where we just were. So now we're back in the skill creator area, and to add a skill that I've already had that I've downloaded, I will go plus and either go files and folders to add the skill, or you can very simply just drag and drop, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to add my risk register skill here. It uploads, it's still the .skill format. I'm going to hit enter, and it can go through and it will sort of create that and then add it to my library as well. Cool, so now you can see that it's reviewed what's inside the risk register, and it's gone through and asked if I'd like it to install it. I've gone add, so that should be going through and it's adding the risk register to my skill collection. And it's running those commands now, but while it's going ahead and doing that, if we come down to this task that I did earlier, in Contractor OS, we have a plugin which has all of our skills bundled into one. And we also have a plugin of each of the different categories that we break out construction into. Now, in this instance, what I've got is the procurement version of that. And what I wanted to do was test that you could actually go ahead and upload a plugin and it would install all the skills individually. So that's what I did. It pulled out the 4 skills and it did add those to, except for the one that I had already installed, and it added those to my skill library. So now if we go, let's just check it on the create a skill one. You see it's added the risk register skill. So let's go and check to make sure that got added. All right, it'll be on my personal ones, and you can see there's the risk register one. And these were those skills that are added earlier from my plugin. So it has gone ahead and added all of those. So that's another very easy way to add a lot of skills at one time. And that's it. The skills are going to be the foundations because they're your workflows you can call on going forward. And that's where they live. Now, before I jump on to work, I want to go back to a new task and just explain a little bit more about the models. So recently, ChatGPT has had a big update where we're going to go into here and you can see they now have the model as Sol, Terra and Luna are their core ones, and the different effort levels. So the best way to think about these is if the Sol is your gruntiest one, is the heaviest one. If it requires a lot of thinking and reasoning, then Sol will be your go-to model. The second is Terra. This is your everyday. So this is probably what's going to be the right model for sort of 90% of those tasks. And then the last one is Luna, which is a lightweight, fast model that doesn't do a lot of reasoning. So good for, say, like those Google search type queries where you just need a very quick answer. Doesn't need to know much, like what's the time zone in Paris. You don't need Einstein to be able to know to be able to give you the answer to that question. And then the second aspect to all of these models is they have both an effort level and a speed level. So effort level is essentially how much of it's, how long it's going to reason for. And to do that, we have light, medium, high, extra high, and ultra. Obviously, the higher up you go, the more usage it's going to consume, but the more it's going to think about something. So generally sitting between medium and high is what you're going to be doing for most of your work, unless something really requires that extra level of reasoning, because you've left it a little bit looser, it's not quite as constrained, or for whatever reason that may be. And then the second part here is the speed. And you can see we have either standard or fast. And so, I mean, to be honest, I've only ever used standard because fast, yes, it's nice to have something quicker, but it's going to cost you more usage to do that. So if you have tons of usage, then absolutely, but if not, then just having standard is fine for now. And that's sort of the wrap up of the foundations around ChatGPT and how everything fits together. And now I'm going to jump into the work section because I think that's what's really important for getting the most out of this for the construction space. Okay, now let's move on to ChatGPT Work. And this is the bit that is really exciting for construction because now we can finally have ChatGPT Work inside of our folders without having to go to Codex. And what ChatGPT Work really is a harness that is much easier, more friendly to use than that of Codex. So it essentially gives you access to what Codex can do, but through the interface of Work, and so it is easier to use. And what it actually has is its own sandbox that it runs in and so it can run things like code and do other tasks that allow it to create the pieces of work that we need it to do. For example, if we're building a register, it can then go ahead and build that Excel document through its plugins. So now let's jump in how to actually use it for a construction company and some of the key things to do to make sure that it actually works well and understands the documents and where to find the activities that it needs. And one of the core aspects of that is when we give it a task, it'll go away and actually look through the context that it needs to be able to complete that task. It'll work out how it's going to do it, and then it will go ahead and do it, rather than being that quick back and forth chat that you may be used to when you are inside of a chat. So we mentioned skills a little bit earlier, and one thing I want to touch on here is skills are for Work and Codex. So they won't actually run inside of chat. So for example here, if I click on the chat window and I go, say I'm looking for the procurement register, nothing comes up when I type that in because skills don't run there. Skills are what run in Work. So if I come here and go at and start typing procurement register, you can see it pops up here as a skill that we can then run. If I click it, it goes blue. That's how the skills work. Now to start using ChatGPT Work, what we need to do is actually get it set up in a folder. And the best way to do that in terms of when you're working for a construction company, whether you're a project manager, an estimator, or something along those lines, is to think in projects. So the best place to start is an example of what may be a small electrical firm's system. So you can see they might have administrator and business development, health and safety, quality, environmental, plant and fleet. I'm sure they have some tendering stuff, much more. Generally, depending on the size of the business, if we were to connect CoWork to everything, it would be just too much and it wouldn't be focused enough. And when we ask a question on, say, like what are the liquidated damages of a project, it would potentially get confused between different projects, assuming you're running multiple of them. You probably have an archive of them as well. So the best way to connect things is to actually go in and think at a project level. So in this instance, I just have a demo folder with one project in here. And within that, I have everything associated with that project as well. And I'll touch on that more soon. But what that now means is I want to connect ChatGPT Work to all of this so that when I'm doing work or asking questions or whatever it may be on this project, it will be able to pull the answer out of any one of these documents when I come to ask it. So that's how to think in projects. If you run 2 or 3 or 4 projects at a time, then you'll likely have 2, 3, or 4 projects running in here. You can also set up some personal projects, like I have my own operating system, which understands a lot more about me and my business and my content and that side of things. So that's an aside to the project work that I do. So thinking in projects is really important. Now, how do we get a new project set up? So very simply, you can go new task. And at this point, it's connected to my existing project. So I can go don't work in a project. And this is for one-off tasks where you may upload the context that you need for it to create the output, but then it won't be used in the future. So what we actually want to do is choose a project to work from, and that's going to appear on the side here. So you can see if I click on them, they'll all roll up and get rid of the context from there, and I can just open the one I want to work within at any one time. So to do that, and the way I've attached this project, which is the one we're just looking at, is I've gone choose project, new project, use an existing folder. I click that, and then I select the folder. Now, the most important thing is that this folder must be local on your computer, meaning that it's either in your C drive, if you're on Windows, or on your desktop or your document side as well, if you're on the Mac. Now to connect it, it's very simple. You just click use an existing folder, you select the folder, you go open, and you're good to go. And that's the same for all of them. Then I'm going to touch on how to set up your folder in just a second. But very briefly, I want to talk about how to do this, because most of us are running on either Google Drive or SharePoint, and having duplicates of that can be annoying. So there's 2 ways to approach this. The first is the safer way, and something that you probably should be doing if you haven't worked with something like Claude Cowork or ChatGPT Work before. And that is creating a duplicate of the folder on your desktop so that when you go ahead and use ChatGPT within there, the work that it changes is not the live work that's inside your SharePoint. That means that you can give ChatGPT free run and not need to be worried about it deleting something permanently or editing a document that you don't want it to edit, or you're not aware that it has edited, because that is when issues arise, and go from there. However, it is possible to run inside of SharePoint if that is something that makes sense for you. And obviously that does mean giving ChatGPT access to all of the files within that folder, and then it can go ahead and make changes and edits to that. So it's important you keep in touch with what's going on there and have some confidence and understanding of how it is running and working. And if you want to do that, the way that is done is if we come across to here, this is on my desktop, so there is no issues with this one. But if I was to go to my OneDrive, I click on my OneDrive, I can right click and go always keep on this device. Or if it's Google Drive, it'll be make available offline, or one of those. That creates a second copy essentially for this on my device, and allows ChatGPT Work to actually be able to connect to it. So I've done a test on this. Now, Windows is a little bit more funny, and there are a couple more bugs around that, which I've come across in the community. But for example, this one here is actually a OneDrive file, a OneDrive folder that I've connected, and I've gone through and confirmed that it can actually read it by following that strategy. But there is some nuance to that as well. And so it is worth noting and being careful of also. So I'll touch on what more you can do with that, given you've got everything connected and your team can also see the documents and that you're producing. So that is how to get a project set up. You'll have a number of these. You can click the 3 dots here and pin projects you use a lot. You can remove them, you can delete tasks, and that's where you can operate them out of there. But what we actually want is for ChatGPT to be able to find what it needs easily, and also on every chat we have, at least have a base understanding of what it is that is involved with the project, what are the people that are involved with the project, what are the drawings, all that sort of stuff. We want it to be able to access easily so that when we're asking questions, we can get reliable answers, we can get them quickly, and we don't want to be burning a lot of usage getting simple questions. And to do that, it's all about setting up the project folder correctly. So as it currently stands, ignoring the AI context folder because I've just added that in, as well as the agents.md, there's a ton of documents within inside of here that are all in Word, Excel, and PDF, which, yes, ChatGPT can read, but is not as efficient as a document type called a Markdown or a .md, which is very simply the cleanest and easiest way for an LLM to ingest context and be able to pull that in regularly. Now, what ChatGPT Work does is every time we're inside this folder here, if there's a file called this agents.md, it will read that every single time, and that allows us to do a lot of cool things when it comes to helping it find the context it needs to be able to do the work that we want. So what we have in the community is a skill called the project indexer skill. And what that does is essentially go through all of the documents inside a project folder and create a agents.md if it's on ChatGPT, or a Claude.md if you're working within Cowork. Now, on top of that, it creates what we call a 0.ai context folder, which then has more markdown files with more information on other things like what's in the drawing and what the project's all about, as well as some business context. So along with project context, there's going to be a lot of business information that is really, really useful for your LLM to have access to as you're going through and completing your work in here. And that business context may not live within that markdown file. It may be an external database or software that it calls to find that. So an example of this is if you're doing a contract review and your business has a set of terms that they would deem acceptable, and that set of terms could live in a structured database, say in Supabase. And so the business context will say the standard conditions that are acceptable live inside of Supabase. So should the LLM ever come across a time when it needs that, it knows it needs to go and look at Supabase to actually have that information pulled out to go through, and so it could complete the job better, essentially. So that's what the project index has done, and it's created these items within inside our folder here. Here's that agents.md that I was talking about before. So you can see here, as I've just quickly modified it for ChatGPT, now it's out, that it's pointing towards the Claude.md, the project.md, and the drawings.md in the AI context folder. And before working the project, to read through all of those to get an understanding of it. Now, generally, what you would do is I will change it so that the agents.md has all the information that it needs within there and can go and look externally. But for now, this works. And so now we can have a look at what the Claude.md entails. And this is where we actually start to get a really good understanding of what the project's about and where to go and find things. And you can see here, it's mapped the entire folder structure to what's actually in there, so that if we're asking a question on a site diary from a certain date, it knows that it's going to be contained within the site records section. And you can see it's even got some more details on where to find what, that is typical, related context files, and analysis, and index, etc. Now, if we look at the project.md, this has some core things about the project. So those common questions that come up, or context that is useful to know when going through and completing work within it. So for example, here it's got the commencement of the project, it's got the practical completion, some insurance stuff, delay notices that need to be done in 10 working days, all that sort of stuff, the scope, and just some core things that it needs. And with the reason being is that if it can't find the answer in here, it then knows where to go to find the answer, and then it can look at the original document and spend that usage in effect going through, reading, understand that. But what this does, it gives it a great foundation to be able to start from. So every time you use the ChatGPT Work in this project here, it already has a good understanding of what's going on. The last one, and I haven't run a drawing analyzer yet, so this is just an overview, but it's gone through and indexed all the sheets and what's on there as well. And what I would normally do now is run what we call a drawing analyzer, which goes through and splits out every single sheet and creates a markdown file for each one of those so that it can pull context from the drawings without having to look at them every time. And that just makes it much more efficient because it'll only look at the actual drawing when it absolutely needs to. So just so you can see, that's what this folder is here. So Claude.md, there's a drawings.md and our project.md, and the remainder stays the same. And just before we move on, the reason that is important is because that last year, it was prompt engineering. That was the big thing about getting more out of these LLMs on being able to do more complex tasks. This year, with the power of the models, context engineering is a very important aspect to it, because if you give an LLM now, or one of the new models now, a poor prompt, but really good context, it will figure out what you actually want reasonably well. Whereas if we give a model a really good process to follow, so a really good prompt, but not great context, then what we'll find is the output of that will likely be worse than the one that actually has the better context behind it. And then just before I finish off on this context, I briefly mentioned the business context, and that's something that would live in your AI context folder as well. We have a skill in the community that helps you set that up so that so that ChatGPT knows where to go to find the information that's relevant for its task. It understands what your business is, core philosophies, team members, whatever it may be, can be contained within that, and it can take that through to every project. So every one of your projects will now have an AI context folder, and it will also have the business context within that as well, which is enough to keep it going. Now, just quickly, I want to run through our community contractor OS. So the link to check that out is down in the description. And here we have some foundational stuff on how to approach AI in construction and the different models, whether it be Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, etc. Then we have over 95 different workflows that you can go through, install, and download and use and modify to your own business in the own way that you work, as well as how we see everything come together in what we would call our operating system and building that out for your business and your projects. And we also have unlimited one-on-one coaching calls you can jump on to get your questions answered, with our entire goal to be making sure you get genuinely useful results from AI as quickly as possible, and they actually help you run your business and your projects better. Now, I'd love to see you in there, and the link for that is just down in the description. Cool. So now let's move on to connectors and actually being able to connect, or plugins is probably the better word to use when it comes to ChatGPT Work, so that we can connect to outside software. Now, to do that, I'm going to use the example of Supabase. And Supabase is the tool that we've set up a structured database template on for the community. So if I come to plugins here, you can see as it loads up, there'll be a ton of different plugins that we can connect to and use. And I've already got a few connected in terms of documents, PDFs, Gmail, Canva, etc. But what I'm going to search for is the one that I want, and this will be the same for any of them. So I actually want to connect Supabase, which is this one here. So I'm going to click install, and it will pop up, and then essentially it's giving me an overview of what I'm about to do. So I'm going to go continue to Supabase, where it's popped up on my browser for me to log in. So I'm just going to go and log into my account here to essentially authorize the connection and go from there. And while you're on that page, it does give you the permissions that you're essentially allowing to it. So there's things called read and write. So reading is pulling information from the tool in, so context essentially, and writing is where ChatGPT can write back to it. So Supabase is a database. That means that if I'm giving it write access, it is able to then go ahead and write to the database, which is important to know to make sure you understand what is actually going on behind the scenes there. So I've just hit authorize on that. It's loading through and it should come through now as connected. So now I can pull through information from Supabase into my ChatGPT, which is extremely important when it comes to looking at workflows that we'll get on very shortly. And then if we come down here, we can search for Supabase. And now you can see that there's no install, it says connect. Now I can go manage. And this is where you can see like the skills that it has come with it too, because it's a plugin. So it has skills. I can reconnect it there. And I can try it and go through like that. So that is plugins. And if you want to add other ones, you can. So for example, SharePoint is another one that is a common one to connect to as well. Same process, you're going in and authorizing. It will show you what you can and can't do. So that's plugins. It's important that when we're building a skill or modifying a skill, that if we're calling information from, say, Supabase, for example, that we specify that in the skill and tell it where it is and what it is to get. And in the skills we build in the community, for example, with Supabase, there's what's called the schema, which is the layout of the database. It knows what to query to pull in the information that it gets to. And the way that is stored in a skill is if we come in here to skills and we go to my personal one and we look, for example, procurement register should have it. You can see that it goes through the steps that it has, and there's a reference files in here as well. So what you can do is put in a reference file that matches the schema so that when Claude queries it, it knows exactly what it needs to go away and search to pull back the right information. So just some other things to keep in mind as you go through and are using these and setting them up for yourselves. It's very much a case of telling it where it can go to go and get the right context. So that is that. Now, moving on to another one, which is a great place for construction, is what are called scheduled tasks. So scheduled tasks are exactly what they sound. They're tasks that run on a schedule. So a good example of that is if you keep a correspondence log that each day you may have ChatGPT go through all of the emails for that day, categorize them, and have it update the register based on your parameters around that as well. It's a good example of scheduled tasks. The classic is the daily brief, where you can get a snapshot of your day ahead or what happened yesterday and go through from there. Now, the way I like to run scheduled tasks is to essentially create a skill for the task that I want to schedule. And what that means is that I can very simply inside of the scheduled task say run, set, and then name of skill, and it will run that periodically as it goes through. But before I do that, I can test it manually 3 or 4 times. I can iterate on it and make sure it's working how I want it before I leave it as a scheduled task to go away and run essentially on its own. So to set up a scheduled task, it's very simple. You come up into scheduled here. You can either hit create, which will take you to create with ChatGPT. We'll then ask you some questions and you can create it that way. I actually prefer to create them manually because I use skills. I'm going to go create, then hit the down arrow here, set up manually. And then very simply, it's setting up the scheduled task. So for example, if I wanted to run the project indexer, say once a week to keep my markdown files up to date with new information that comes into a project, I will just go run and then go at project indexer. That makes it super easy and it can run in a new task. And the project that I want it to run in, the one we're just working on, I don't really need solve for that. I'm just going to go Terra, reasoning, I only need medium, and repeat. Let's go weekly, Sunday at 9 a.m. Why not? And then very easy, go to add a title. Don't forget your title. So project indexer run and hit create scheduled task. Now I have that. It's saying its next run is in 4 days and it will go ahead and do that. You can see the active sticker in here. Now we've got active, paused, which I don't have any on. So that's a scheduled task. Now that is good to go. Cool. And then the next thing I want to show is this area called sites. So this is essentially where you can create your own website, basically. And what they are is either a great way to get across ideas and meetings and that, or I like to use them for registers. So you can get a visual of a register that may be kept inside of an Excel document. Just gives it a nice interface. And you can see here, all I've done to run this inside of the project folder here is build a website. And on the RFI register for the pro electrical job, team members can add an RFI, and I've given it some parameters around what they can and can't do within that, like attaching photos and filter by status, and then require people to sign in with our workspace account as well, if that is necessary. You can go open, and you can open in ChatGPT here, which this is essentially the browser. So you can run different tabs, like you can go here and the browser tab in there. You're essentially in Google, you can enter a URL and view it, do research. But here, this is my one. You can see this is the URL is created that I could share with the team. And I need to continue with my ChatGPT account to be able to access the site that I've created, because that was what I specified inside of the thing. So I'm just going to log in there now. And now I'm logged into that site that I've created, the website, and you can see this has built essentially a viewer for the RFI that is on in an Excel document, and it's gone through and created the open, answered, closed areas for the RFI as well. I can add an RFI and go through on that. So a cool way to be able to share information. And I really like the combination of a front end like this, whether it's built on ChatGPT sites or through Codex, tied back to a structured database, which is the truth behind everything. And then this is just a viewer. And then you can make simple edits and changes like adding an RFI or being able to change the status on certain things. It makes keeping a register much easier to keep up to date, combined with something like a structured task to keep it up to date. So I really like that. And that's actually a really cool use case you can share with the team. So I'm going to exit out of this now. And essentially that gives you the foundations for being able to work within ChatGPT Work. Now what it is building up your library of skills so that you can go through and complete your work within inside each project, having AI or ChatGPT help you along the way. And because each document gets saved inside of that folder, then that actually allows the context to grow over time, and you'll be able to use the output of one thing. So for example, your requirements register, and be able to use that in another workflow down the track. So you can continue to sort of stack workflows. Now, what we have in the community is we have build out your own OS here, and we have our workflow section. So split out into the 11 categories. And then down the bottom is our Excel document here. So if we go across, you can see this is what you want to be building up and how you're going to get the most out of ChatGPT Work. So this is for pre-construction, split out into phases. This is the one we've got for the community, the way we see it. But every business has a different set of processes that they go through to essentially achieve said outcome. And so what you've got here is it broken down into different phases, and each phase has it broken into workflows. And every workflow has a skill about and then what it does and the in-skill assets. So what's actually in it, the inputs, outputs, what feeds it, what triggers it, and then what the human role actually is versus the AI role as well. And then any related skills and workflows for all of the ones that you have. And this is like your SOP for using AI essentially. And then when you're doing work inside of ChatGPT Work, it's in parallel to you. So you can use this as your guide. So, okay, I'm onboarding the project. I'm going to run the project indexer, the drawing analyzer. We're now going to go through the go, no-go decision. And again, this will have access to your business context in terms of the scoring criteria you have for your go, no-go and the template you use for that. So you'll invoke that skill, you'll call on that skill, it'll roll through and essentially can do the heavy lifting for you while you do all the review, the decisions, and the inputs that actually matter And that goes right the way through the pre-construction process. And that is how you get the most out of ChatGPT Work. Now, I'm not going to touch on Claude Code. I'm not going to touch on ChatGPT Codex in here. I'll do that in a separate video. So I think for the majority of people, it's the foundations plus ChatGPT Work is where they're going to get the real benefits from using this. So thanks for watching. And the link to join the community is down in the description. I'd love to see you in there. And thanks for watching.